And we did not visit anything like justice on Germany because justice in Germany would have been impossible. It would have laid waste to a country that's a very important country.
So you think that what the Israelis did, for example, when they apprehended and abducted, basically kidnapped Adolf Eichmann, that they should have just killed him and bring him back to Jerusalem?
No, I didn't.
Was the wrong thing to do?
I didn't say that either, because...
No, I'm asking. No, I know you didn't. I'm asking you.
The Eichmann trial, taken years after the fact, was a demonstration. It was an act of moral theater. I think it had a lot to recommend it in that sense. And partly because he was so defeated, and partly because there had been time, and partly because so many people at that time were putting the Nazi crimes under the carpet. I mean, they were not as big an issue, incredibly, in the early 1960s.
I mean, how much time has elapsed between 9/11 and what bin Laden did? Almost a full decade.
It wasn't the lapse of time, as I was just trying to say. It was the fact that in 1962, the consciousness of this crime was too low. And the reason for the trial was precisely to have an elaborate demonstration and reminder of what had happened at a time when it got relatively little attention. Because in 1962, the former criminals who worked for the German state, East and West, were not receiving pensions. They were actually still in government. They were school teachers, and they were judges, and they were heads of corporations. That the world had had given Germany after the war, I mean, the war was horrible, but after the war had given Germany a very light touch of responsibility. So the Eichmann trial was a show in that way. It was a moral theater. But
so let me ask you. The current right now we are, and by the way, I think one of the benefits of giving people trials before killing them is a demonstration about our values and who we are as a people, and how that we are distinguished from the people who we say that we're fighting against because they're so fundamentally different than we are. I think that's one of the benefits of it. But right now in Guantanamo, we are holding somebody who bears at least as much responsibility for the 9/11 attacks as Osama bin Laden, and that's Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who's alleged to be not just the spiritual head of Al-Qaeda, but the operational mastermind of the attack, someone who actually put it into motion. There's at least as little doubt about his guilt as there was about Osama bin Laden's. Do you think that we ought to just take him out basically today and shoot him in the head, or are you give him a military commission in the trial?
But I think we did the right thing with him too. At that time, we knew he was captured early. He had information that we needed. You wanted to take him alive so you could question him. And at this point, he's in American custody, so you can't just shoot him out of hand. He needs some kind of legal process. I don't know why that hasn't happened. Let's do it. I'm actually not over fussy about whether this distinction between military commissions and civilian trials. I don't get too excited about. I think I have a mild preference for military commission and a mild preference for not doing it on American soil. But if it were to happen that they were to start tomorrow as a civilian trial and in a New York courtroom, that wouldn't bother me too much either. Just let's do it.
What would be the objection? What would be the principled objection to just taking him out and shooting him in the head tomorrow or today?
It's not just a principled objection; it's a political objection, and I think one of the things that.
But is there a principled objection?
I think if a man has been in custody in American custody for a long time, you don't shoot him out of hand. But I also think you want to do.
What does that mean? Like if he's in custody for a week, it's okay to just shoot him in the head. But after a year, it becomes kind of unpleasant, and you should probably give him some process. I mean, to me, my view is that once someone's in your custody. Mm-hmm. And as a helpless detainee in your custody, that you don't shoot them in the head and dump their body into the ocean without giving them some process.
But
that they've actually, because by then they're incapable of harming you any further. That's the nature of being a captive.
But then the question is, you think that's a clear line. But the question of when does custody start, and when we're measuring in tenths of a second, which is what I think when we get down to the bin Laden case, if the video is ever released, there will be people who say, "Gee, he looks at that." At moment 92 out of 100, he looks completely helpless. So there's no reason to have killed him at moment 98 out of 100. But these things happen to the people who are there, who are at risk, very fast. So I don't think it's going to be too punctilious. But I think that with a lot of these things, as I said to you before, just as I think you're thinking about this needs more history with your law, it also needs more politics with your law. That one of the things that we achieve by killing bin Laden, and whether he started to say the words "I surrender," or whether he, got, how many, whether he tried to vocalize it, how much of that vocalization he got out. I very much doubt he got out the whole phrase. It didn't give him that long. That this now allows us to close it. I mean, one of the things I would be thinking, if I had your politics, never mind your legal view, and wanted, for example, the United States out of Afghanistan, the United States is out of Afghanistan a lot faster with a dead bin Laden than it is with a bin Laden who's in some brig somewhere.
Okay, let me just make a couple points what you said. First of all, this idea about, this is the same discussion about law, mixing law and balancing with politics and the like that we had the last time about whether Bush officials should be prosecuted and the like for what I think is their clear law breaking. I look at John Adams, and what he said was you have two choices. You can be a nation of laws or you can be a nation of men. And once you start saying that leaders are free to just liberate themselves from the law in pursuit of political or prudential ends, then you're essentially freeing leaders from the constraints of law. Law no longer is what Thomas Paine said it should be, which is the only monarch, the king. It becomes just one of many factors to weigh, and leaders' unconstrained decisions become permissible. And I don't trust that. I trust the bounds of law, as the founders did, much more than anything else. But I think even from the political perspective, one of the things that everybody across the spectrum has agreed upon, more or less, you can find some dissenters, but more or less, is that we're not going to win the war on terror by exterminating all the terrorists, because the more we try to do that, the more we create. It's about perceptions in the Muslim world. And I actually think that taking Osama bin Laden and showing the Muslim world how we handle and treat everybody in our detention, Muslims or non-Muslims alike, the most hated to the most beloved, that we treat them equally under the law by giving them due process, showing the world the evidence that he was actually guilty, given that a lot of people still don't believe it, and only executing him then, if we did at Nuremberg, the way that we did with lots of war criminals, would be way more politically beneficial to our ends in the Muslim world than what it is that we did. And the final point I would say about Afghanistan, I'm completely unconvinced that the killing of bin Laden is going to help us get out of Afghanistan. I think that what happens is whenever there are events like this that rejuvenate this American excitement about the military and the use of force, I think it makes wars more likely. I think it lets the commander-in-chief have much greater freedom in terms of what he does, because now there's greater trust of the citizenry in him. And I think that that this is the sort of thing that's going to keep us in the Middle East for a lot longer. It shows the glory of war and of killing. And it's a huge number of people in the citizenry who are accepting the idea after being skeptical for a decade, that we really do have lots to benefit from things like sending Navy SEALs into sovereign countries that we're not at war with, and using force with no due process. So I actually am not at all convinced that it's going to help end wars. I think quite the opposite. It's probably going to militarize the might of the country even further. Well,
I hear 4 points there. Let me... two of them I can dispatch very quickly. Let me respond. First, John Adams.
Good. Well, maybe two left. Okay.
Now I can say what I have to say. I don't mean that they will be dispatched. Okay. Osama bin Laden, 2 bullets in the head. John Adams, not my favorite founding father by any means. I'm with Ben Franklin on that one, who said that Adams was always an honest man, often a wise one, but sometimes on many things just out of his senses. I'm with the American tradition that says foreign.
But wait, David, before you move on, there are things that I don't like about John Adams as well, but the idea that you can be a nation of laws or a nation of men, that's sort of elemental to our entire. That wasn't one of his controversial propositions.
I am with those who. That long American tradition that says that the realm of law is the realm where there's a sovereign, that law governs the relations within a state. In a world of states, it is a very ambitious project to govern the relations between states by law. And I think if you and I, that would be, if we were to say, what is the one thing that could spend the next 100 hours, 1,000 years arguing about it, is that the relations between states are not governed by law. We can try to legalize them, and to some extent, that is a form of human progress. The fact that international postal conventions and things like that. But in the end, where there are
things like the Geneva Conventions, that's law, right? When we enter into a treaty that the Senate ratifies and the President signs, the Constitution says it becomes the supreme law of the land. That's law, isn't it? That governs our conduct with other nations and with other people.
To some extent, that is right, and but it's a process. That the idea that we have an international rule of law, or that we ever can, or that we ever will, or that we ever should, until the day when we have one world government with all people voting in it, and it's an elected government, I find it that it's ultimately a receding mirage. That the relations between states are governed by power, and the relations outside between Americans and those outside the American boundary, those things are ultimately governed by power. You can have a lot of law mixed with
might makes right, basically.
No, you have a lot of law mixed with your power, but you cannot take your way. It is not that the rule of law in the way that Adams described as applying inside the boundaries of the United States. It is simply, it's a fiction, sometimes romantic, more often dangerous to imagine that happening between the United States and the rest of the world, or between, any two countries.
Israel and its neighbors.
You can sometimes have cases like the EU, where you can see countries on the way to transforming international law to domestic law, and how that will work out is a fascinating question. I think about it a lot, and sometimes I'm optimistic and sometimes not. But yeah, Israel's neighbors are, I think, with two exceptions, are all in a state of war with Israel. So of course those relations are governed by power. So that I think is just it's a dream, in some ways romantic, in many ways dangerous. I think so the idea that this is something that is a casualty of this, and this goes to your point about sending the Navy SEALs in. Pakistan had made a series of undertakings in the United States. Pakistan has entered into covenants and agreements and relationships, accepted money, and Pakistan has been on notice for a long time, and very emphatically by this president, that if it shelters this man, bin Laden, it is at risk of having its territory penetrated. And they knew what they were doing. And to the extent that important people in Pakistan are implicated here, and they then complain about the violation of their sovereignty, I'm sorry, what they did with bin Laden, if it is really true that this is an act of war, and if they are let up lightly from that, they are winners here. The fact that it's merely...
So if it's proven that high government officials and military officials in Pakistan knew of bin Laden's whereabouts and shielded him from the U.S., what do you suggest happens? What are you hoping happens?
I think we did the right thing. But I'm saying, let me put it this way. If the president had, instead of sending the SEALs, had gone to Congress with the photographs and said the government of Pakistan is sheltering Osama bin Laden, and I ask for a declaration of war against Pakistan, he'd have got it. That is absolutely an act.
Well, I mean, I don't have much of a problem with sending the SEALs into Pakistan in order to get it. Because I think that the protestations of the Pakistani officials about this are for public consumption. I think privately they acquiesce to what the United States wants to do in its territory. I don't think those objections are genuine. But what I'm asking you is,
we don't know. There's a lot of Pakistan's a very mysterious place, and if they were so delighted that we got them, they could have been just as delighted 6 years ago.
There's different factions and the like, and it's not yet at all proven that Pakistan did know that where bin Laden was. But if it turns out that military officials and government officials in Pakistan did in fact know where bin Laden was and actively harbored him, shielded him from detection from America, what do you think is the proper response to that? I mean, a war in Pakistan, or
no? I think what is going to happen. I hope we're on the right track. I mean, I think as I said, I'm not on domestic policy. I have a lot of disputes with this president. I think he handled this exactly correctly, and now I think Pakistan comes under intense pressure. And I think our relationship with Pakistan gets downgraded.
But what does that mean, Dave? What does that mean, Dave, exactly? Like, what repercussions should befall them?
Well, here's what it means. And this is where I think your question about how this doesn't mean anything for Afghanistan. The reason it means a lot for Afghanistan is if we are in Afghanistan to get bin Laden, we put up with the hijinks of the Pakistanis in order to support our campaign in Afghanistan. It turns out that one of the hijinks of the Pakistanis is shielding the very person for whose sake we are in Afghanistan. And you think, this whole thing looks upside down to me. That the idea we're paying you to help us support a military mission whose purpose is the thing you're doing, that's crazy. And if what it means is that in order to have a tougher relationship with Pakistan, we need to be less committed to Afghanistan, then I'm not that concerned about the future governance of Afghanistan.
Do you think that we've been fighting in Afghanistan for the last decade and sustaining all of the losses and spending all of that money in order to get Osama bin Laden?
I sure don't think we've been doing it in order to get our hands on their impressive natural resources of rocks and more rocks.
Well, no, I mean, but even George Bush, when asked multiple times about whether that was the goal, said that wasn't an important priority. At all. I mean, I don't think
Well, I don't
anybody
know.
has said that we're, I mean, no, Osama bin Laden has been, if you look at the discourse of terrorism and foreign policy over the last 5 years, Osama bin Laden has basically been disappeared. I mean, his significance at this point is purely symbolic. I mean, nobody thinks that he's the mastermind of some vast Al-Qaeda network and running it